Okay, welcome everybody. It's great to be starting our series on competency-based education. We are doing it as a summer series, but we're actually going to be going into the fall. We started out with 6 presenters, and we're now up to 9 through the end of October. So just kind of keep checking back at our website for updates, and you'll see who is presenting when. So we are now recording the session. So anyone who comes in late, hopefully you're hearing that. And we're really excited about getting the conversation going here in Michigan. One of the things we talked a little bit about prior to getting started here when we were kind of gathering to get ready for today was the number of states who are moving forward with competency-based education. It is really getting to be a huge movement. And I would encourage all of you to look at the INACOL'S site, and I'll get into more of that in just a second. But for updates not only on best practice and those kinds of things, but also on legislatively what's going on across the country. First of all, I thought I'd introduce myself and Lisa. I'm Marcia Miles, and I'm President and CEO of EdTech Specialists. And Lisa is a consultant with EdTech Specialists. And we've got a great crew. I want to encourage all of you to check out our website as well. We really are proud of the work we've done across Michigan, the districts we've worked with, and the different conversations that we've brought people together for. And we've also been very instrumental in working with legislators and helping them see the value that things like competency-based education bring to students across Michigan. So, I hope that you will continue to attend our webinars on competency-based education as we all learn more and more about it. And, these things wouldn't be possible without the sponsorships that we have. We've got one sponsor with us today, and I'll be introducing Joe in just a minute. My Virtual Academy is another sponsor for all of the webinars, and several of them are in attendance today, which is great to have you with us. Another one, of course, is EdTech Specialists. Another one is ThinkSpace. And ThinkSpace is a conference center in Lansing that just opened up, and I would encourage you to go check that out. It's a very creative setting, and it tends to kind of, we've worked on there a couple times, and it just because the setting is so different, and it's got little pockets of places people can go and have side conversations, and then ways to share information with one another. I'd encourage you to take a look at that because it's a great spot. And a couple of people that we know quite well have started that together. And then I also certainly I'm going to transition over to Joe right now. Let me go to that slide right here. And, whoops, I've got the wrong way. Joe, you're the Executive Director for Research at MVU, and we really appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. It's wonderful to have these continuing partnerships and all the things that we're doing across Michigan and further. We're all reaching out. As we've said, there are no boundaries anymore. There are legislative boundaries by state, but there's certainly communication boundaries are gone. So, Joe, if it's all right, we're going to hand over the presenter tool to you. And again, we thank you so very much for your sponsorship.
Thank you very much, Marcia. I appreciate that. Can everyone see my screen okay? Go ahead and just type in the chat.
Yes, I think we're good.
Excellent, great. Well, MVU is proud to be a continued supporter of the work of EdTech Specialists, and we're very pleased to sponsor the first in a great series of webinars on competency-based education. You can see some of the presenters on the screen there. If you haven't already done so, we encourage you to register for the other webinars in the series. I'm sure it will be worth your time. MVU is a nonprofit organization that was established in 1998 to deliver online education and training to the citizens of Michigan. Its mission is to advance K-12 education through digital learning, research, innovation, policy, and partnerships. MVU is the parent company of the Michigan Virtual School, and since 2000, MVS has recorded approximately 180,000 online course enrollments. This school year, MVS will provide more than 23,000 course enrollments, serving students in more than 500 Michigan schools across the state. MVU also runs a statewide web-based professional development system for Michigan educators, offering compliance-based courses on topics such as the dangers of bloodborne pathogens to instructor-led courses on online and blended teaching. LearnPort provides Michigan educators and school employees with over 1,900 online courses, videos, webinars, and training modules. And as Marcia said, I work for our research institute, and the work of the institute is to improve K-12 online learning practices and outcomes. Each year, the institute explores data collected by the state to gain a deeper understanding of online learning here in Michigan. A couple of key findings from the 2013-14 effectiveness report. Over 76,000 Michigan K-12 students took one or more virtual courses during the 13-14 school year. Though cyber schools get a lot of attention in conversations about online learning, only 12% of the virtual learners in Michigan attended one. The majority, 78%, attended their local school and used whatever homegrown or third-party solution their school offered. Those 76,000 Michigan K-12 students accounted for more than 319,000 virtual course enrollments, an increase of 73% over last year. Again, the majority of the virtual learning continues to come from the local schools using their homegrown or third-party non-MVS solutions. If we look at performance, the students who did not take a single virtual course in 2013-14 passed their face-to-face courses 89% of the time, whereas the students who took at least one virtual course only passed their face-to-face courses 71% of the time. And this suggests that the typical virtual learner at present in Michigan tends to be a below-average student. And though their pass rate for face-to-face courses was 71%, their pass rate for the courses that they took online was only 57% statewide. However, when we look at students as the unit of analysis, we see about half of the students passed every single virtual course that they took. Roughly 30% of them failed every single virtual course, and only really 20% experienced some kind of mixed results. It's clear that in Michigan, many students are being well served with virtual courses, but clearly too many are not. There are many more findings featured in the effectiveness report, which can be downloaded for free from the MVU website. One of the key takeaways should be, though, that we need to continue to find ways to improve the overall learning experience for online learners. One of the places to start is to help educate parents and guardians about what online learning is and how to best support their child when they learn online. Toward that end, MVU has developed a free resource called the Parent Guide to Online Learning, and it's available through our website. Similarly, school personnel who serve as on-site mentors need knowledge of best practices for supporting the online students they oversee. MVU's Mentor Fundamentals is available for free and is full of research, tips, and best practices collected through interviews with multiple mentors throughout Michigan. And finally, students will be better served if they know what to expect from an online course and they've developed the skills and strategies to be successful when they move online. MVU's Online Learning Orientation Tool is a freely available, self-paced resource designed to help students understand what online learning entails and introduce the knowledge and skills that are key to success. MVU has a rich history of collaboration with Susan Patrick and INACOL, serving as experts and contributors to many recent INACOL projects, and we're very excited for her presentation today. Susan and her team have helped to transform the field of K-12 online and blended learning, and her insights into competency-based education will leave us all with ideas to ponder. Each year, INACOL puts on the Blended and Online Learning Symposium, and it has become a must-attend event for anyone wanting to stay connected and informed about the trends and new models in online and blended learning. I encourage you all to learn more about the work of INACOL, and if possible, to attend this important event. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it back over to Marcia to introduce Susan Patrick.
Thank you very much, Joe. I'm going to show my screen right now and bring back up my slide. It takes a minute. I guess there's a little bit of a pause here. I don't know. Can you guys see my screen yet?
Yes.
You can? Okay, because I can't. I'm not never quite sure about how some of this technology is playing with us. But at any rate, in just a moment, we're going to pass the baton. I want to give a brief introduction to Susan. And Joe, I really appreciate what you have provided, the information about INACOL with us, because, you know, they do play an extremely important role in some of the movements, in particular with competency-based education, online and blended learning. And those are the kinds of things that Susan, as president and CEO of INACOL, have really helped guide, not only through the conversations and the resources available, but just in really always, every time I reach out to Susan, she is always very available and responsive in a very positive way to help keep me informed, to guide me, to direct me to other resources, and to truly be available for any questions we have, whether it's best practice or legislation or anything having to do with any type of new initiative that we're all looking toward for students throughout the country. And of course, for these webinars, we're really trying to kind of focus our energies on Michigan. And we're really so pleased, Susan, that you would be with us today and help us launch this. And so I'm going to pass the baton over to you so that you can pick up right now, and then we'll pass it back to me at the end. Prior to getting started, Lisa, you can certainly transition it over, but I did want to let people know about the way we can communicate with Susan throughout the webinar. You can enter your questions into the chat, and if it's a time-sensitive question, Lisa will ask that question during the webinar itself. Otherwise, we'll wait till the end and address those questions for you, and we encourage you to answer any question or to ask any question that you have. Also, at the end, we're going to give the participants the opportunity to verbally communicate with all of us. Actually, we can have a conversation if that works, or just one-on-one with Susan. So we will open up your microphone at that point. Right now we have everybody muted, but we will open up your microphone and allow you to ask questions verbally so that you can have some back and forth if you would like to do that. So without further ado, as they say, I'm going to pass it over to you, Susan. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I see my microphone up on the screen. I'm Susan Patrick. I'm the president and CEO for INACOL. And INACOL is a nonprofit that works to help illuminate the path forward in terms of what the future of education looks like. But it's a bigger shift that we're seeing around a transformation to student-centered learning. We believe you can't do this shift without online and blended delivery models. They're incredibly important for leveling the playing field and making more high-quality educational opportunities available to students. But there is a bigger underpinning in this transformation, and since 2009, when my co-founder, Chris Sturgis, who will be doing another webinar with Marcia on June 23rd, Chris Sturgis and I, back in 2009, co-founded an initiative that's national called Competency Works. And we did the first scan of literature in the field of K-12 education on what is this fundamental conversation we're having about the need to shift from, quote, seat time to competency-based education. And it's important not to confuse this with online and blended learning as delivery systems, but understand that our work in online learning clearly points to our #1 policy issue being moving away from seat time. It doesn't make a lot of sense to develop policies and practices around seat time when you can do anytime, anywhere learning. So let's differentiate between the kinds of online and blended delivery models that really have the potential to transform education to a foundational system design, which is around moving from a traditional time-based system towards one that is focused on mastery and competency-based education, or more simply, competency education. So what's the big idea? The big idea here is that our traditional system breaks down in a traditional classroom. Most look like one teacher to 20, 25 students using a single textbook, doing the same lessons at the same time, and grading students from A to F on a given period of time. The next day, they move on to the next lesson, regardless of whether a student got an A, B, C, D, or F. What ends up happening is if students regularly get B's or A's or C's all over the map, is you get this Swiss cheese effect in terms of your knowledge of competencies, which is even a B means you missed 20% of the material. If students are sliding through with C's, they're missing 30% of the material. And then we ask ourselves, how is it in ninth grade, we have students entering ninth grade, and they have these huge gaps across first through eighth grade in core knowledge in math or core ideas or concepts in English language arts. This is the function of having a system that is really focused on time and varying amounts of learning along the way. So the big idea behind competency-based education is that the system is designed around ensuring mastery before moving on to the next lesson. So think of it as A, B, or try again, or requiring that demonstration of a level of proficiency or deeper learning and mastery before advancing. So what does this mean? It means that in ninth grade, you can't have those holes because the system is designed around ensuring learning and providing those supports. Competency-based education has been of great interest to policymakers. So even a few years ago, you had a handful of states that were advancing flexibility from seat time. Now, this doesn't mean that time is not important. Time is important. But if you think about the construct of how much learning can happen per unit of time, or ensuring that students hit mastery within time-bound targets, you start to shift the system around students and student needs and focus on learning. So more and more states, including Michigan, which went for seat time waivers, opened up, how do we redefine Carnegie units, not just in terms of minutes in a seat, or how we earn credits in terms of number of hours spent in a certain building with varying levels of learning, towards let's have some flexibility on our definition of credit to also include the development of competencies or mastery and attainment, so that our transcripts start to mean when we read these standards, when we read these courses and subjects, we know that students actually have the skills and knowledge outlined by the state in those standards. So huge growth. By last year, you have more than 90% of states making advances to provide flexibility from seat time so that new pathways, competency-based models of instruction can take hold. And those can be in traditional schools, those can be in online learning environments or blended learning environments. So the core here is around competency-based education. Now, the first thing we found in our research is that people were using the term competency-based education to mean very different things depending on the setting, the state, the history with competency education in that state. So, for example, in Oregon, they call it proficiency-based learning. In Maine, they might refer to it as proficiency-based learning. In New Hampshire, they might call it competency-based learning. So performance-based learning in some states. So these different terms. We think people should feel free to use the term that best suits their local environment. That's fine, but we should have a common idea of what we mean. So we worked with 100 innovators from across the field in pulling together a working definition. And this started as a 3-part definition, but really expanded to 5. And the 5 core ideas are, it's not competency-based education unless it has all 5 of these elements. And the first one is really key, and that is that students only advance upon demonstrated mastery. That means they must produce a demonstration of the mastery at a certain level of proficiency on each standard or objective. Number 2 is that these competencies are explicit learning goals that are measurable and transferable learning objectives, and students are empowered by them. Students say, describe the role of the protagonist in the storyline, and be able to do these learning objectives clearly call out what a student needs to know and be able to show. Number 3, assessment is meaningful and a positive learning experience for students. So when we think about, okay, I'm ready to show my teacher that I learned this objective and demonstrate my mastery, and if a student misses that, the student is getting immediate feedback. Oh, I see, it's A, B, or try again. I see what I missed. I'm going to come back until I hit mastery. So students are getting timely, differentiated support based on where they are in their learning trajectory and on that specific feedback tied to their learning goals. The last piece is, this is more than just academic standards. It's academic standards plus those skills and dispositions that students need to be successful. Whether you call those habits of mind or 21st century skills, it's the development of those important skills, dispositions, problem solving, communications that they will need to be successful in their academic careers, but also later in life. So where are we now with state policy and regulation? I mentioned that more than 40 states have advanced some competency-based flexibility in their state education policy. Usually that's in regulation. Sometimes that is in legislation. We have in several states proficiency-based diploma options. In Arizona, they've got a Grand Canyon diploma. Maine is probably the furthest ahead in having proficiency-based transcripts for diplomas that show colleges, universities, and even prospective employers these sets of skills that students have demonstrated mastery on. You have really interesting state policies emerging on a few of the advanced states on, imagine this, new accountability models and new systems, plural, of assessments, plural, that include performance-based assessments and measured summative assessments for No Child Left Behind and elementary and secondary education. So New Hampshire just got approved for the first true competency-based accountability model. And if you're interested more in that, some of the other webinar speakers will be talking about, it's called the New Hampshire PACE program. It is a way to design true accountability and transparency that is aligned to student-centered learning. So if you think about our current accountability and assessment systems, they're very much driven by an ultimate goal of ranking schools on a list. We need accountability systems that are aligned to student-centered learning. So that's, I'll end there. We could have a whole webinar on that topic alone, and you will be getting great speakers coming up to do just that, including Rose Colby and others. So there are states that are integrating competency-based education into the education code, and I'm going to give you a quick example of Iowa, and Sandra Dopp is going to be another one of the speakers on this series. But Iowa directed the state education agency to help set up some frameworks to support competency education. Innovation zones are a really interesting state policy mechanism. So in Kentucky right now there is legislation in Ohio. I've been out testifying there on creating space for innovation so that schools and school districts can help develop and pilot new competency-based learning models. Credit flexibility, which I mentioned before in Ohio and Oregon, just provide that you don't have to go and get a waiver from the state like you do in Michigan. You just have the flexibility to be able to act on having options to seat time. There are really interesting pilots, task forces, and study groups in a number of states across the country saying, what is it in our state that we have in statute in other areas that might restrict the ability to start to do this transformation to a competency-based system? There are a few states that are a little bit behind, that are not quite dipping their toes in the water on competency ed, but it's less than 10, and the majority of the 40 states are really examining new competency-based systems, what policies will need to support it, what kind of professional development and leadership and teacher training are involved, and really looking at different areas. The Smarter Balance Assessment Consortia, which New Hampshire is part of, has a report that they released on this topic, and as Joe mentioned at our conference, the INACOL'S Symposium, we have an entire strand on competency-based education, and we've got Brant Red from the Smarter Balance Consortium leading a really interesting discussion on competency-based accountability models and assessment models. So here's just a snapshot in one state. Iowa, and this was enacted in the legislature, called for a competency-based education task force, and it was to study how they would begin to plan and build out competency-based instruction. The A through E here, these 5 areas are really core. They looked at redefining their definition of the Carnegie Unit into specific competencies, how they would help support districts and schools create personal learning plans and templates for each student and each instructor. They looked at examining what it would take to move towards a student-centered accountability and assessment system, how to leverage technology, online and blended learning in this shift, and how they could help develop supports and professional development. They put together a collaborative of 10 different districts that are part of a working, innovating, and making this transition and learning from each other. So they've done a really terrific job. All right, let me take a step back. So we've been talking about the policy side. What does competency-based education look like in practice? So this is an introductory webinar. If you think that each individual student, so I'm a student in school, I have my own personalized learning map, and it's got all of the standards across the continuum, K through 12 education, broken down in specific competencies. What do I need to know and be able to do? The teacher has specific rubrics. So the teachers get together in the planning time before they launch competency-based education initiatives. And for each of those standards and each of those competencies, they develop rubrics that say, what is it that a student needs to know and be able to do? What does this look like with different kinds of evidence? What does it look like at a novice level, an emerging learner level? What does it look like with advanced proficiency? And what does it look like at a deeper learning mastery level? And in each subject area this is done, it's called tuning, a tuning process. And so teachers are powered with these rubrics. The students also know what the rubrics are, so they know what they need to hit. What does this mean for managing this? This sounds a lot like standards-based grading and standards-based learning from the 70s. Well, the ideas are all there in terms of demonstrating mastery before advancing, but it was really hard to manage all of that data several decades ago. So now we have technology that can help support these truly centered learning environments so that we have multiple access to multiple resources and content, both digital and paper-based, and different ways for students to learn. We have data systems that can house these personalized learning maps and indicate the level of progress on each standard. Also tie into e-portfolios to hold those student exhibitions and examples of student work. So you have students that know targets, know where they are. You may have students in the same classroom working across 5 different standards, small groups, one-on-one learning, some whole class instruction, lots of collaboration. You've got adults shifting roles towards personalization, grouping, regrouping, and even teachers starting to specialize in particular areas. There's classroom learning, there's online learning, there's expanded learning opportunities with internships, museum learning. So it doesn't matter where you learn these skills. Here's my learning objective and my learning goal and where I am on the trajectory. I'm really interested in learning about this particular standard through dinosaurs or through space exploration or through baseball or football. Students can choose how, when, where they're learning, as long as they can come back to school and demonstrate, I say come back to school, demonstrate that through a performance at a level of advanced proficiency or mastery before advancing on. So it really opens up this transformational idea of highly personalized student-centered learning. The competency-based education is really the foundation for that. Now this slide looks pretty wild. It was actually, this graphic is from Jason Zimba, who worked on Algebra 1 and some of the math in the core standards. If you think about this S curve as the components for learning standards in terms of Algebra 1, those are the building blocks you have to learn. Learning isn't always linear, so there can be core concepts that you have to learn in clusters, but in the end, you end up learning an entire subject matter curriculum. If you think of these circles as learning nodes or applications or lessons, you may learn part of Algebra 1 by taking an online module, by watching some Khan Academy, by learning some from a Michigan virtual school. Or you may learn from a traditional textbook, a study group, some one-on-one tutoring. The idea is you can learn these different components as long as you can come back and demonstrate that mastery. And if you imagine next generation learning models, they will be set up competency-based where students can access real-world application opportunities, peer-to-peer social opportunities, whole class instruction, virtual instruction. So the idea that you can have many different applications and tools within your learning trajectory. Competency-based learning. This is from an Oregon report. It is really fundamental to personalizing learning at scale, and when you start to implement it, it does challenge almost all of our assumptions about the present system. So much is tied up in a time-based schedule, so much is tied up in calendaring and scheduling, that when you really redesign the system around students and meeting student needs and having both really clear frameworks and guidelines for what a student needs to know and be able to do, really clear rubrics on assessment, but you open up this anytime, any place, any path. Number one, when you talk to teachers working in this environment, they will say the upfront work in setting those guidelines and rubrics really clearly is one, professionally really rewarding, and two, really gives you the power to personalize instruction in ways never before possible. But three, once that's set up and you have access to all of these curricular resources, again, whether they're online, digital, or whether they're accessed in your classroom, or outside the classroom, it becomes so much more efficient and powerful. The powerful learning that takes place is what really makes the difference. So I'm getting a little bit short on time. I just want to show you some pictures of what this looks like. This picture is from a middle school in Denver, Grand Beacon Middle School. And here's an example of English language goals. So here the English language art learning goals, and I'll just say number 3 at the top middle of the picture. Here's a student saying, I can explain how a story's plot unfolds. I can describe how specific events cause the character to change throughout the story. I can analyze how an individual event or idea is introduced or elaborated in informational text. So here's the great thing. This is clear standards and explicit learning goals. These students are empowered to use a variety of different texts based on their interest, describe and co-design with the teacher how they're going to learn this particular goal, and go and deeply immerse themselves in the kinds of texts that are of most interest and engagement to them, and come back and clearly demonstrate this. So here's one example in a classroom. And at the bottom, I'll give you some other examples. The teacher has pointed out student exemplars. The other thing that you'll notice is that there are 6 different, there are actually 8, but my picture only goes to 6 different learning goals up on the walls. So some of the students might be on number 2, and some of the students might be on number 6. And if I'm a student on number 2, and I know that my friend Marcia is on number 6, and I really like the way she explains things to me, I can go and grab Marcia and have her help me. So there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning and support taking place in these environments too. Here is a picture of what you would call a classroom environment, but these teachers have figured out to use one of their class periods as a collaboratory lab, a design lab. So these students may be working on all different learning goals and objectives. Some of them may be working on math, some of them may be working on some other subjects, and teachers take turns coming in and out. You can see how flexible the furniture is. They're constantly grouping, regrouping, moving the walls around. The other thing that you can't see on the left side of the screen is there are some teacher desks set up so that teachers on their free periods come and hang out and do some work, but they also get to watch and witness and observe how other teachers use and do their flexible competency-based models. So this is a blended school that is highly personalized and is founded on competency-based education. And there's just far more transparency and interaction between teachers working together in flexible ways. The structure is all around the learning and the learning expectations. Here is an example of a competency-based school where they call it posting of our best work. So here are student exemplars of what the student evidence and the student work looks like at the highest level. Here is a science classroom that is blended and competency-based, so students are working on different goals and learning objectives. And so we're going around and talking to different students, and they're working on their projects for how they're going to show their learning. This is from a school in Minnesota. What you can't see around the outside of the walls are small group tables where students are working on different projects together. So there's a lot of independent work, guided instruction, one-on-one tutoring, but this looks a lot more like a modern workplace. If you go to Yahoo or you go to Google's offices, they look a lot more like this than a standard traditional teaching environment. A lot more flexibility on time. Again, time matters for time-bound targets, but the focus is flipped completely to focus on competency development and learning. This is from Summit High School in the Bay Area of San Francisco, San Jose. And again, really flexible environment. Students are working at different areas on text and on projects that are of interest to them. It's a combination of project-based learning, online learning, and blended learning. Really personalized pathways with internships in the community, access to community resources. But as students are going through the material, they have, you can't see it here, but like a Genius bar set up so that there's one-on-one tutoring help whenever they want it, with teachers and feedback. But what I also love is they have this concept of assessments always open. So I've got my learning objective. I'm ready to go find, please go up to the podium, talk to a teacher. You've learned it, now show it. Show and demonstrate your knowledge. So this really open feedback loop, and assessment is for learning. Every learning is for demonstrating your learning and showing mastery. This last piece, this is at USC Hybrid High in California, and one of the things that you have to do in a competency-based environment is, if you truly can only advance on mastery, when students come into a new competency-based program, pilot, or school, you need to know what level they're on. And so obviously this is a high school. USC starts in 9th grade, and they provide a assessment to figure out what level kids are in on entry. So there's a benchmark entry assessment that's adaptive, and they found that their students came in into 9th grade very far behind. On average, they were at a 3rd or 4th math level, but they had students on a 1st grade, 2nd grade, all the way across the continuum of 1st through 8th grade levels. This is a real the emperor wears no clothes moment for those of us in education, and educators saying, how on earth am I going to accommodate for students being in so many different places? My response to that is, the truth is that is happening in our classrooms every day. We just aren't looking at the data and addressing students where they are. So truly, in a transformation to a student-centered environment, we need to be honest. We need to ask for the data. We need to look at it. And then we need to meet students where they are, because we know that if we start where a student is on their zone of proximal development and we start to fill in those gaps, students can accelerate rapidly and catch up and get back on track to graduation. But if we continue to let these huge Swiss cheese holes in their academic learning experience persist, of course, by the time they get to 9th grade and then they're just fire hosed with 9th grade content without having those foundational skills and knowledge in their own student backpack, in their own experience, they're going to continue falling further and further behind. So this is really about being honest about what education is and what every student needs to know and be able to do, and then being really honest about meeting students where they are and doing everything that we can to redesign the system, to provide those supports, to provide those interventions so they have differentiated, personalized learning experiences to get them up to speed. So I will wrap up just by highlighting some key themes on competency-based education, and that is, we are working really hard in policy at the federal level and at the state level to rethink accountability towards systems that would support continuous improvement and support competency-based education. Because once a year summative assessments based on age and birthday at particular moment in the calendar time, when you have students at all different levels, and by the way, those assessments don't hold any teeth for the kids, is a real mismatch between trying to set up a system to do the right things and inspire student-centered learning environments and competency-based pathways. We need to think about this as systems, plural, of assessments that include performance-based assessments, formative, embedded assessments, as well as these entry benchmark assessments. When you think about it that way, then you can say, wow, we could have much stronger and more effective accountability systems if we started to look at the range of data from systems of assessments that were also meaningful for the teacher, the parent, and the student. This will require very different information systems that we have in most education environments. Most of our information systems are built around student data systems for compliance and in today's compliance. This is around building information systems that are integrated and support true student-centered learning and competency-based pathways. So I think I will just wrap up there saying there are a number of these high-level issues. They're really interesting. We're involved in many of them in our work at INACOL and Competency Works. We have produced more than 14 reports over the last 5 years, researching both big picture scans and trends in competency-based education, as well as very specific topics like grading systems and competency-based education or turning standards into competencies. So competencyworks.org or visit inacol.org, and a number of other organizations that are our partners on this have produced a number of terrific reports. So compared to where we were 6 or 7 years ago when there was almost no literature in the field, there's been tremendous interest, tremendous growth, and also a lot more resources to help educators and policymakers start making the shift to competency-based education. You don't have to do it all at once. You can start piloting in a particular grade or in a particular school or a particular classroom or program. But I think it's really important for us to ask, what is it we want our students to know and be able to do, and start to see that it truly requires competency-based systems where we're asking our students to demonstrate mastery before advancing. So I'll end on this quote from my friend and colleague Stephen Heppel, who's in England, runs a program called notschool.net. Students should advance on stage and not age. Age and time are for adult convenience, and there's no limit to how fast and how far our students can go. And with that, thank you, Marshall. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Susan. That was fascinating. I'm going to, if you're going to give me the presenter tool back, Lisa, thank you. We want to open it up to questions, and Lisa, if you can help me kind of monitor that. If you guys have any questions to put into your chat area, that would be great. We'd love to see the questions that you have. If you want us to open up your microphone, we can do that too. Just put that in the chat. Give us your name, and we'll unmute you. I think I would like to start out with a question, Susan, because as I'm listening, I'm just kind of curious about, certainly you gave us encouragement for being able to transition from, kind of the status quo into competency-based education, for the school district that exists, shall we say. But, I think it's easier, as I look at some of the layouts of some of these schools, I guess I'm kind of wondering if, they kind of started from the ground up, and that would seem to be easier. But obviously, that's not the way to, take the whole nation from into this environment. So, how many competency-based education schools and districts are there that have, started from being a traditional school and gone to that? How long does it take them on average? And then, how many schools exist that are CBE-based that are started from scratch? Do you have any information on that?
Well, I can give you my perspective on it, which is, the U.S. Department of Education collects a lot of research on the conditions of schools and K-12 education. And given that we have over 100,000 high schools and more than 14,000 school districts, in order to know how many classrooms are actually moving, you would need a national study like an NCES. So that's not we just the clear data on exact numbers are not out there. Now, I can tell you from working at INACOL across the field, what we've seen is from maybe 10 years ago, there are pockets of innovators, right? There are even individual classroom teachers that might hear Marzano speak on standards-based grading that come back and start pulling in competency-based grading and elements of the model in their own classrooms in a school that you wouldn't describe as competency-based. But with that said, over the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen more and more school districts get interested. And so you used to say Chugach, Alaska, back in the mid-90s, will move to full competency-based, and they're still doing it, and they have been doing it now for 20 years, and it is amazing. Chugach, Alaska is in a very rural, remote area. The learning experiences that those students have now in a highly developed competency-based system, and especially when you contrast that to what it looked like 25 years ago when it was very traditional, is absolutely phenomenal. But you have districts in most states doing advanced work. Lindsay, California, half of the high schools in Maine have proficiency-based models. The entire state of New Hampshire has redefined the credit hour in terms of competencies. You have Sanborn and Pittsfield and a number of districts there. So I would say across the U.S., you know, it's hard to give you an exact number on how many whole districts of the 14,000 are moving to competency-based, but the number is growing every year, and more and more there are individual schools and school designs, and even a lot of the charter schools too that are traditional charter schools like Summit and KIPP are putting together a whole strategy to move to competency-based and blended, just because how can you get to where you're going without doing that? One of the most developed virtual schools is also in New Hampshire in terms of having competency-based pathways where they offer not only online courses but actually units, individual units, so that students that might struggle with a particular unit in their local high school can go online and build the competency by demonstrating it after taking a unit, and then continue on their program in their traditional school. So it's still an early innovation in this shift, but more and more schools and districts are interested. And then you have grant programs, like we were on the original partners on the Next Generation Learning Challenges grant program with EDUCAUSE and the Gates Foundation. And so just through that program alone, you have 40 new schools between ages, grades 6 through 12 that have whole school models that are competency based. So it's been happening quickly. There are hundreds out there, but they're at various stages of development. And in terms of how long does this take, the principal of Grant Beacon will say they started doing the community outreach on what do you want our students to know and be able to do, and their teacher, working with their teachers until they got 80% teacher buy-in, and that process took over 3 years. And then they started the planning stages and started the implementation, and there's usually 3 years of implementation before things really start to, you start to see all of the system interdependencies that get challenged from a time-based system to the shift. So it takes a good 5 to 7 years before I think people even feel like, I want to say, not quite comfortable, but it's just a process of really being honest about student learning and continuous improvement.
Great, thank you.
That's a long answer, sorry.
No, that's great. In fact, you may have answered one of the other questions up here, but Lisa, did you want to get to some of the chat questions?
Yeah, somebody's asking for examples, and I could go and rattle a whole bunch of them off. I will tell you that in mid-June, I want to say in June 12th, so it's right before Chris Sturgis's webinar, Chris is releasing a new paper from all of the school visits and all of the interviews that she's done over the last 5 years with school leaders and district leaders in competency education. And it's going to be insights from the leadership in the field. That paper will be coming out from INACOL and Competency Works. I think it's on June 10th if we get the thumbs up from all of the funders on it. But that is going to be chock full of exemplars, names of schools, leadership to connect into. I'm really excited for it to come out.
That sounds great.
Okay. Yeah. The only other question we had, Susan, is then would be for like the badging system. I don't know if you've seen that with online badges. Have you seen any examples of competency-based education systems using a badging system to track student skills?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have not seen any exemplars from that. And I just say that's a really short answer. I think the idea of combining competency-based education models with a really strong badging and certifying that knowledge has happened, and that can happen in different ways in different places, is going to really open up an incredible landscape for powerful, innovative learning opportunities for kids. And I see that as being, I'd like to say 3 to 5 years off, but I think it's probably more likely 5 to 10 years off, just because there's so many structural issues that you run into. I think there's huge potential in the badging, and if anybody knows of great examples of badging systems that they see in K through 12 education, I would love for you to share that and even blog about it. We have a blog on competencyworks.org, and it's just amplifying great work that's on the ground. Lots of examples there, lots of case studies of individual schools for those of you that are looking for exemplars and places to visit. And also, a lot of the people in this field have been incredibly generous with sharing their own rubrics and examples and tools. So we have a wiki on the Competency Works website where all of that is openly available. And so it's just a really great community of pioneering educators and innovators that are interested in learning from each other.
Terrific. Thank you. I guess there are no other questions then at this point. Does anyone want to have their microphone opened up to ask a question of Susan? If not, Susan, thank you so much. This has just been perfect. Like I said, we were, real pleased that you could help us launch these conversations, and you've given us a lot of information and a lot to think about and a lot of resources to go to. And as always, like I said in the beginning, you're a yes person. When I ask you anything, no matter what it is, you've always giving me that yes, and I appreciate that so much. So thank you so much for being with us today.
No, thanks for the opportunity to be here, and I'm just happy to be part of this and committed to everybody's success. I'm just blown away by the great work that's happening, so thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now, and I will also close out this session in just a minute. For those of you who are